Christmas trees have long been a tradition for many Americans. While Germany gets most of the credit for starting this long-lasting tradition, many historians link traces of this holiday tradition back to Egypt and even Rome. In the 1800s, German settlers brought this tradition to the United States, hence creating a whole new demand for the Christmas tree market. Joining us today from Pennsylvania is Michael Grega. Michael works for Helena, and he helps tree growers across Pennsylvania in growing the perfect Christmas tree that will stand in the homes across our country. He's going to share what it takes to grow the perfect Christmas tree for your home. Plus, we'll visit with Jody Lawrence and get the latest in commodity markets. Stay tuned for FieldLink. Joining us today from Pennsylvania is Michael Grega. Michael works for Helena, and he helps Christmas tree growers across Pennsylvania grow the perfect Christmas tree that may stand in one of your homes across the country today. We're going to learn a little bit more about Christmas trees, and Michael, tell us a little bit about your experience and what you do at Helena to help growers grow Christmas trees.
Well, hello, Bill. Glad to be on. For as far as background, I've been actually dealing with Christmas trees since I was in high school, helping out one of the local farms around here. Actually, is a wholesale producer of Christmas trees, and I started there, like I said, around 10 years ago. And since then, I moved in with Helena, and in terms of agronomy, helping these growers grow nice trees and get them to people's homes, make them look nice and make it cost effective for the grower.
Wow. So did you grow up there in Pennsylvania then?
Yes, I grew up in the town I currently live in, and there's actually about 5 Christmas trees farms that are local to this area, this town, not just the surrounding area. And so it's a mainstay of the community here, and that's kind of where I got maybe the start with Christmas trees, but as well as other agriculture.
So, Michael, tell us a little bit about you. You grew up there in Pennsylvania, and did you go to school to learn a little bit more about Christmas trees and study agronomy or agriculture?
I went to Penn State for the bachelor's degree with environmental resource management and soil science, so it was more general outlook of production and ecosystems and things of that nature. But yeah, lots of focus on soils, getting them ready, and as well as plant sciences, as well as in the agronomy club and things like that. So yeah, I went to school and learned even more through college, and then put that into practice in the field.
Awesome. So you mentioned there's about 5, sounds like sizable Christmas tree farms in the area that you work. And tell us a little bit about your branch. You're in Mifflinville, Pennsylvania.
Yes, Mifflinville. When I say 5 in the area where I work, I more so mean 5 just in this little small town. As far as Christmas trees that we serve in the branch, it's the number I don't know. It's probably in the hundreds. I know Pennsylvania is one of the largest Christmas tree producing states. I know that. So we're working with a lot of growers out of the Mifflinville branch, and I'm sure some of our other branches in Pennsylvania too.
So how long does it take, Michael, to produce, I guess, a quality Christmas tree?
On average, it's around 7 years to produce a tree. It's very variable from depending on size. There's certain people like a small little tree, and other people like the tall ones if they have a big ceiling. But for like a 6 to 7 foot tree, the average time's probably around 7 years. And that could also, that's with a lot of our, agriculture practices and fertilizing and kind of making it as efficiently as possible to get them, because the least amount of years in production, the cheaper it is for the grower and ultimately cheaper for the consumer as well. But so anytime you can cut off a year with proper management, it's a big help towards the productivity.
So you mentioned, certainly there's different customers, different homeowners have different needs for sizes of trees. But what seems to be one of the more common ones that you and your team get to work with and, help those growers produce?
The common size is probably like around that, anywhere from 5 to 10 feet. But as far as varieties, the Fraser fir, cane, Douglas, concolor, very popular, and blue spruce. And they're wide-ranging in styles. The Fraser and the Canine are a little more upright. They're upright and thinner, so they're better for small area situations. The blue spruce they're like the name says, they're blue. People like them for the color. And another popular one would be concolor because they have a little citrusy smell to them. And a lot of people really like that.
Now, are those trees somewhat native to the Pennsylvania area, or are they imported, or how do those trees evolve in your market?
A lot of those are native to North America, Pennsylvania included. Specifically, I believe the Fraser fir is, I think, one of the most areas is North Carolina. But they're definitely they're not necessarily too much of a import. There are others that are, like Norway spruce. It's not necessarily as common as a Christmas tree, but some people do use it. But that's generally they're local and from their natural habitat, native.
So, Michael, as far as I guess a novice when it comes to trees and specifically Christmas trees, help our listeners understand the process for growing a quality Christmas tree. How are they planted? When are they planted? Are they planted by seed or seedlings? Walk us through that whole journey.
So a lot of times they'll start out in nurseries where they are planted. The seeds are planted. So very tiny seeds are planted very densely. They are usually very small area. We're not talking necessarily acres, or maybe totally there'd be acres, but it'd be a tinier subplot of the field where they would have millions of trees, seedlings. That's usually done in the springtime, and that process takes about a year, maybe two, that they're in that high density setting. Then typically the tree that you cut your Christmas tree farm on buys it from the nursery. The nursery lifts them out of the soil and packages them to ship them to what you would call the Christmas tree farm. They then plant them that following spring, most likely, and then that's about when the 7 years begins. It's not usually, it doesn't count that first year. So then once the tree's transplanted, typically it's in rows and blocks so that the tractors or spray equipment can get around them. So they're not necessarily acres and acres without any space. It's typically around 1,000 trees per acre is the planting, maybe 1,200. And it's like 6 by 6 spacing. So it would be 6 feet lengthwise and 6 feet width in the row, to where the trees have space to grow and get larger so they don't choke each other out. Or otherwise they'll be too spindly and they won't be full, and you'll be able to see right through your Christmas tree. That's the kind of gist for getting it started.
Wow. And then once they're started and going, what kind of fertility program do you and the rest of the Helena professionals use there at your location to help enhance the growth of those trees?
Not many people realize, but it does take a pretty decent fertility program to get these trees ready within that 7-year time period. Typically, first thing we will start off maybe with lime for pH amendments. Each variety that I mentioned has different pH targets, which is interesting. Certain ones are pretty acidic, down in the 5.5 range, while others like it about 6.6. So it's very variable in terms of the pH. But once we get that corrected, then in terms of fertility, a decent nitrogen program with about maybe over the course of the year, maybe 75 to 100 pounds or more, depending on the size of the tree. When the tree's younger, they go with much, a littler amount of fertility. When the new growth's only putting on maybe 3 or 4 inches, versus by the time the tree's about ready for harvest, it wants a lot more fertilizer to push it. But phosphorus is a key nutrient as well. In order to keep them established and going, they're not very good phosphorus feeders, so it's helpful to have phosphorus levels high, but you don't want to be out of balance. And then potassium, they also use up big time. Calcium is important in terms of needle retention, so that's big for towards the end of the growing season, or the production time, where nobody wants to buy a Christmas tree and have all the needles fall off immediately after they buy it.
My wife doesn't like that when that happens, Michael, that's for sure. So.
No, not many people do. Ideally, you want those needles to hold on there the whole time that tree's up, and then people keep keep coming back. But in terms of fertility, they're like, I know for Helena, Coron would be a big fit for Christmas trees, in terms of specifically those ones that are close to harvest, in order to get the color right at the end, in case they're make them nice and green. Everybody likes their green tree if it's Fraser or that, but that's big. And in general, usually those nitrogen applications I mentioned for those pounds are split a little bit in the spring, and then some slow release later on and towards the summertime to keep them going. But that's probably a long answer for the fertility. Could go into more detail if you like, potentially. But
Michael, how is your branch utilizing Agri-Intelligence to help Christmas tree growers produce a more profitable tree?
A lot of what our branch does, maybe start with the soil sampling, a part of the Agri-Intelligence in terms of field mapping zones. We want to get those soil samples taken in order to make sure we can get the soil amended properly. Like I mentioned earlier about the pH being different recommendations for different varieties. So you want to make sure you have a good soil sampling program, where high ground fits in very nicely. And in terms of the fields are usually pretty narrow strips. So there could be variation on one end of the field versus the other, so that's where a little of the precision fits in. If we can have some different rates for different portions of the field to make sure everything's lined up with the pH as well as the fertilizer needs, from end to end. If the field's long and narrow, the one end might be different than the other.
What are some typical challenges that growers face while trying to grow Christmas trees in your market today?
A lot of the challenges do come in terms of pests. There are a lot to get that perfect tree. There are a lot of pests that will get in the way of that, from weeds. Weed control is key to make sure that what you're feeding that tree gets to it. And if there's too much weeds underneath the bottom will get thin, and it won't be as nice of a tree down towards all the way down. Also, just insects, mites, and fungi all provide challenges to the growers, which Helena has a great way of fitting in and helping them overcome some of those difficulties. Keeping a strong spray program running, and making sure we scout the fields and make sure we're hitting them when we need to and not spraying when we don't is key. Basically that integrated pest management that everybody talks about, and making sure that the tree has everything it needs to succeed, and not something isn't. Weevils are a main big problem, which they like to climb to the top of the tree and basically penetrate the leader, which is that top stem, which everyone puts their star on, would be the leader, and it kills the tree from the top down. Those are massive problem. Once the leader's gone, it sets the tree back most probably 2 years, because then you have to basically prune the tree so that it can regrow straight.
So having a good scouting program, or in our case, an inspects program, is pretty critical to stay on top of some of the pest management for, this particular crop.
Yes, that's exactly right. Lots of time in the field, helpful to actually making sure you're hitting those pests at the right time, and then making sure you're coming back in and getting them. Don't want to be building resistance. Many of these pests are many generations in a short period of time, and that's a perfect way to build resistance. So it's a lot of scouting is key if you want to really make everything perfect.
Yeah. So, Michael, in your market, you mentioned there's just locally, just around you, there's at least 5 large growers, and there's a whole bunch more that your branch services. But how are those trees typically marketed? How do your customers market these particular trees?
There's multiple outlets. Probably 2 would be the main way that it happens. One of the most fun and exciting way, more of the agritourism way, would be choose and cut, where general public comes onto the farm and walks the fields and chooses which tree they like. Usually they bring the whole family. It's really a fun time. It's a tradition for a lot of families in the area, where they'll take the family out, go walk through the fields, take pictures, everything like that, and pick the tree. Then it gets cut down, and then they take it home. That's a very big part of Pennsylvania's Christmas tree industry, specifically for the smaller growers. There's a lot of smaller growers who really rely on that, whereas some of the larger growers are more of the wholesale, where they'll take the tree, get it cut down, many trees, cut them, a lot of them down, and then ship out tractor trailer loads of them to surrounding urban areas, cities, New York or Philadelphia, or places like that, where people can go to lots and pick out which tree they like there.
Well, it's definitely a wide variety of marketing and how those trees are marketed. And as you mentioned, there's that very intimate, hallmark almost experience where, mom and dad take the kids out in the car and strap it on just like...
just like the Hallmark movies.
Hallmark movies, and Christmas Vacation was on top of my mind, actually. But absolutely, chopping that tree down and heading out in the country for the afternoon, and then taking it back home. Well, statistically, there are close to 15,000 tree farms, Christmas tree farms across the United States, with over 100,000 people that are employed full-time or part-time in this particular industry. So, nationally, this is a really big industry. And Michael, as you pointed out, in Pennsylvania, this is huge. So everybody, there's a lot of people involved in growing these trees.
Yes, absolutely. To focus on what you said, I know many people who are fully employed on Christmas tree farms in my town, and it is a big part of the economy and agriculture as a whole, which is a lot of times overlooked. Most people don't necessarily think about it when they think about agriculture, they think about Christmas trees or things like that. They think of either produce or corn and beans, but this is a serious agricultural player, and specifically in Pennsylvania, but I'm sure many other states as well. And there's also other ways for tree production in agriculture, not necessarily just the cut Christmas trees, but also landscape trees, which is a big portion of it, where ball and burlap, it's called, where the tree gets dug out of the ground to be transplanted in someone's yard or at a construction site. That's potentially also an even bigger aspect of the Christmas tree agriculture production side, even though it's not quite a Christmas tree. But
you bring up a great point, and I think that is a huge sector that, a lot of us involved in agriculture kind of oversee sometimes because, not everybody has Christmas trees or landscaping trees in their backyard. But this is a huge industry. And, when you step back and look at, I guess in your market, Michael, would you say what percentage of all the trees grown in your specific market are dedicated to Christmas trees, and what percent would go towards, more of a landscaping situation?
In terms of actual tree count, it's most likely maybe 25% for the cut Christmas trees. It's my best guess. I don't know this for a fact. That's just my best guess because there's a lot of trees that do go out for landscaping or these construction sites, and more trailer loads of them. And it's a big part of it. I would assume that's a bigger percentage, which is something to be said because you know how many people get Christmas trees. But you'll see those tree lines along people's houses or just a couple trees in their yard, and those add up very quickly, especially with some developments going in.
Well, I think that's a pretty good statistic, when you step back and think, some stats that I pulled together. It shows around 34 to 36 million Christmas trees are produced in the United States each year. And if that's consuming about 25% in your market, that tells us the tree population, the tree production is really big in Pennsylvania and probably a lot of other states as well.
Yes, it's very interesting and definitely maybe lends into the stat that I know about something like about for every one Christmas tree cut, there's 3 planted. So it's a very renewable and long-term success based on that, basically.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. When we talk about, and the buzzword right now is sustainability and conservation. There's a tremendous amount of good things around Christmas trees. Quite frankly, just the amount of carbon dioxide that's produced. Statistics show that about 1 million acres dedicated to Christmas tree farming today. Each acre provides enough oxygen for 18 people. So they're doing quite a great deed, I guess, for all of us from a human standpoint as far as the trees are concerned. And, Theodore Roosevelt, who's known, as one of our great presidents and conservationists, he had a conservation program where he wasn't too excited about Christmas trees because he thought it would devastate and remove all the trees from the nation. But over time, he changed his tune a little bit and realized that this is a great renewable resource if managed properly. And he really got behind Christmas tree production later on in life by enhancing some of the White House festivities at the White House when he was president. And his good stories talk about how his son snuggled in Christmas trees later in life and into the White House, and Roosevelt really got behind it at that time. So a lot of fun history around Christmas trees in our country.
Yeah, pretty interestingly, I believe the Christmas tree in the White House this year is actually from the county over from me in Pennsylvania. But can't quite remember what their farm name is, but very often the White House Christmas tree comes from this part of Pennsylvania, pretty close. And I always find that very exciting and interesting. But yeah, definitely very renewable, very eco-friendly. The main competitor for these Christmas tree growers is the artificial tree. I know that around the artificial trees, usually made of plastic. I think something like 80% of them come from China, and there's just a lot to be said about supporting the local farmers, and just probably better for the environment versus the ones that don't decompose, that are plastic. The Christmas tree would decompose. And I know there's recycling facilities and things of that nature, even to make the trees into mulch, and to have them even have a second life use.
Yeah, you're right about that, and it's definitely just not the same, is it? I mean, there's a little more care involved, as a consumer, as a homeowner, making sure that tree's watered properly, and I understand after a tree's cut, you've got about 30 days of I don't want to call it life, but 30 days for that thing to maintain some pretty good quality as far as scent and keep those. Keep everything going well. Do you have any tips for homeowners as it relates to Christmas trees once they're cut?
Once they get into their home, I know warm water would be better than cold water. When you're watering the tree, it helps it float. It helps the trunk actually uptake that water and let it flow through the tree a little bit easier. Just stay after it. That's going to be your biggest helper. The more if it runs dry, it'll probably go downhill a lot faster. Even if you catch it and put more water in, keeping it supplied will be helpful. I know they have those to make it a little easier, and some people don't like crawling underneath it. They make funnels that nice and long, so you can kind of hide them in the back and just reach around and pour it in. Those are just user tips, but I think in general, just keeping it ready with the water, and that'll be the best way to keep it, like you said, not necessarily alive, but in good shape for as long as possible.
Right. There's nothing better than that scent of a fresh cut tree. When you walk into a home, you can always tell it's the holiday season. That's for sure.
Oh, definitely. Definitely very enjoyable.
Christmas trees have been part of our history for many, many, many years. And one of the most recognized Christmas tree out there is the one in New York City's Rockefeller Center. And it's a fun history piece here that tree, that history goes back to 1931 when they were actually building Rockefeller Center, and a lot of the construction workers put a simple tree up in the middle of in this muddy construction site. And then fast forward 2 years after the Rockefeller Center was built, they started that tradition of in 1933 of building or putting that large tree up there and decorating it. The first one was adorned with 700 lights in front of that old RCA building, and that tradition still carries on. And Michael, what a lot of folks don't realize is that was a critical time in our country during the Great Depression, and that tree brought a lot of hope and spirit to Americans across the country when they put that tree up.
That's a very interesting. I did not know that how that started and how the origin, and yeah, that's a big part of a lot of people in the city there, New York City's Christmas experience. Or even I know some people, being Pennsylvania, the state over, do travel over there to look at that tree lighting. So it is very interesting that got started during that time. And during the Depression like that, hope would be a big thing with the season of like this. So that makes sense. During the Depression, they were definitely looking for some hope, and that's a nice little story I didn't know about.
Michael, I want to thank you for joining us here today on FieldLink, and as you kind of educate us a little bit more about not just Christmas tree production, but tree production as a whole. It's a big part of agriculture. It's a big part of our economy, specifically in the state of Pennsylvania and the Northeast. And we really appreciate the joy that you and your customers bring to many, many, many homes across our great nation this time of year.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm glad to hopefully give a little bit of insight, at least, into the inner workings of what actually goes on behind the scenes to get those trees ready for many people to have the presents underneath them coming pretty soon here.
Joining us from Nashville is our guest analyst, Jody Lawrence. Jody, welcome to FieldLink.
Thank you, Bill. Merry Christmas to everybody and happy holidays. Great time of the year.
It is the season for sure, and lots of things happening in the grain markets across the U.S. and around the globe right now. Jody, let's chat a little bit about some of the commodity markets. We've kind of settled out a little bit here.
Yeah, the market has started to slow down, and unfortunately, outside of beans, the grains have started to kind of develop into a little bit of a bearish trend, but simply on demand. The dollar is still strong, even though it's fallen, and our wheat is still overpriced for what Russia has, so we're not selling any wheat. And the corn market, with China not being involved in the corn market because of their zero COVID tolerance, even though they are trying to reopen some things, we're just not seeing enough demand for corn and wheat to be able to keep it from kind of doing a seasonal slide into the end of the year. And on the demand side, we are starting to see bean demand pick up a little bit over the last week to 10 days from China, as they are trying to catch up on some back sales from when they were locked down more extensively across the country in October and November. They are easing their COVID restrictions and their zero tolerance policy, but it's still, probably at best their economy is working at about 75% rate. So we need China to the world needs China to get back in good economic shape and get over the COVID hump that they've run into this time, just simply for raw material demand, since their economy is the largest user of raw materials in the world.
Yeah, they've definitely been making some purchases across the globe on soybeans, specifically soybean meal. I know Argentina had some pretty big sales of meal to them recently, as well as maybe some other South American nations to China. As you mentioned, the U.S. dollar is still pretty pricey in that market from a global perspective.
Yeah, it's still trading at 105, and if you look at it, it was up about 10% at one point. Now it's really over about 5%, but that's still it trims some of the marginal buyers that we have, that they're going to start or they're going to continue to find if supply is available at a cheaper currency.
You bet. Jody, we touched a little bit about some of the wheat supplies, specifically in Russia. They had a heck of a great crop this year, from our understanding. They're just sitting there, though. They're still moving a lot of wheat across the globe to a lot of nations, definitely impacting the U.S. wheat prices.
Yes, it's almost all the world demand has gone to Russia and to the Ukraine, because they have an abundance of it, and they are offering it a discount to the rest of the world as the humanitarian corridor remains open. Even though the war is beginning to escalate more, you had an attack on a Russian air base inside of Russia, 300 miles from the Ukrainian border and only 150 miles from Moscow. And when I saw that, it was during when the markets were closed. I thought we'd certainly get a bounce out of it, because in February, March, that would have been something that moved the wheat price up 30, 40 cents. And the market has just begun to ignore all the war developments, which is frustrating when you see that the price of wheat is back 40, 50 cents below where it was pre-invasion. And what we are seeing this week is we did see the first decent bounce just from a fundamental standpoint, as world wheat prices have started to firm, which tells us that a lot of business is getting done, and that stocks at some point Russia will run out. And there's always the conspiracy theory, and it's easy to think this is accurate, that how Russia had a record wheat crop was they went into Ukraine and stole it. So we'll see, and it may take till spring, summer of 23 to get an accurate count on how much wheat is really in the world.
Jody, while still staying in that region, I've heard some reports recently that in the Ukraine, still up to maybe 60+% of the corn crop still standing. And that really hasn't hit the marketplace yet. How will that impact global supply as well as demand?
Ukraine and Russia, they alternate in wheat between being the first and second largest exporter, and Ukraine's further down the list for corn, but they are a significant amount. And that is frustrating when the market knows all of this, but it is pricing like that corn is sitting in a bin ready to be put on a barge or on a train to be exported. So the market's going to have to do some, over the course when we get the January final USDA report, to do a much better job of finding where all these stocks are, because you can't, with everything that's gone on over there, the power outages, the shortage of materials, the logistics nightmares, think that they have a normal amount of anything to export when we start moving into 23. So still a lot of unknowns, but right now the market has completely discounted the war and the availability of Ukraine and Russian corn and wheat and sunflower oil and the other things that they export.
And as we spin the globe and head to South America, crops in Brazil look really good right now. Things are progressing quite well. But right next door in Argentina, things not so well in that part of the region.
Brazil's crops look really good, and they're on pace. We'll have a USDA report today that's likely to tell us they expect the Brazilian bean crop to be in excess of 6 billion bushels, with Argentina's crop being excess of 2 billion bushels. And when you add those together, you start to understand that if those two countries produce 8 billion bushels of beans, and the U.S., which we had a pretty good year, produced a little over 4 billion bushels, we know that we're in their rearview mirror. But weather in Brazil has been nearly ideal since the start of planting. Seasonal temperatures, plenty of rain right when they need it. Obviously, like any large growing area, there are pockets where there are problems, but all in all, Brazil's in really good shape. But the other side of the coin is Argentina is not in good shape, very dry. They're still stuck in their El Nino pattern, or their La Nina pattern, that they have been the past two growing seasons. And when you think about them being in their growing season, think about Southern Hemisphere agriculture always being about 6 months behind us. So they are in, or ahead of us, depending on how you look at it. They are in their late May, early June timeframe. And while it's not critical, if rain started to fall by the first of the year after Christmas, then Argentina's crop could certainly benefit from that and have better potential. But right now, we are expecting to see Argentina's expectations start to be trimmed a little bit for both corn and beans, not severely like they were last year in the very worst of their La Nina, their 2012 drought. But certainly you have a tale in South America of haves and have-nots, that Brazil is on pace for 2 record crops, while Argentina's crops are suffering.
Meanwhile, back here in the United States, we're drought monitors still showing us a deficit, but we're starting to see some signs of some good things happening. What are you learning from the drought monitor, Jody?
Well, the drought monitor is still when you take in the entire Corn Belt, still worse than it was at this time last year. Western Corn Belt is in the worst spot of it. They have been stuck in a really bad pattern over the last 2.5 years with limited subsoil moisture. And I was just out there this week visiting with all those great people. And it was, they've got some concerns, but understand that it's a long way until they get into the field in March, April. That, 5, 6, 7 inches of rain would certainly help. And then on the other side of that, they need the Ogallala, all of their aquifers for everybody in the Western Corn Belt that is irrigating. They need snow, and indications are getting better when you look at the West Coast and what's happening in the Rocky Mountains with snow, that it should be a more active winter than we've seen.
Yeah, definitely hearing some good things out there.
Yeah, and all that rain still needs to get to into the Mississippi, it needs to get into the Missouri, and all of the tributaries to get the river levels back up, because the Mississippi is still, depending on which week you look at it, still at record low levels somewhere up and down.
Yeah, definitely needs a recharge. We've been blessed here recently with some good rains throughout the Delta. Hopefully, going to eventually recharge that river to start seeing some more barges moving up and down that river for logistical purposes. Hearing some good things out in California in the Sierra Mountains. I heard a report yesterday that the snowpack is now at 165% of normal, which I don't know what normal is, but 165% of normal of year to date, which is good news for that part of the world to recharge, hopefully recharge some of those rivers and streams and reservoirs for irrigation purposes out there. If things maintain progress there throughout the rest of the winter, things could really turn around a little bit for that part of the world, and they certainly need it.
Yeah, they certainly need it. And you don't want to base a marketing plan or profitability on counting on bad weather to sell your crop and to market your crop. But the reality of it is, if we go back into a neutral El Nino La Nina situation and soil moisture, subsoil moisture, rain improves, and the world ends up with bigger crops in the middle of a recession means lower prices. So that's something we're certainly looking at. And I wouldn't say we're concerned, because it's just the normal cycle of agriculture, good years, bad years. But it's something right now as we head into prepay season that everybody has to sharpen their pencils to take advantage of the discounts, and then look to see through their buyers if they have profitability that they can go ahead and lock in early. Because if everything goes well and the U.S. finally gets out of this pattern, we're due for 180 plus corn crop and beans to get back up towards that 52, 53 yield, and that will mean lower prices in 23. So we've got to keep an eye on that.
Jody, as we wrap up the new year, is there anything that we as producers really need to be focusing on as we get ready to flip that calendar?
Well, sitting here today, I'm looking at the price of diesel. The futures price in January has gotten all the way down to under $2.90. And while that's not clearly what you're not paying at the pump, it does show that you've got a softening of energy prices, and that's come from a couple different things. Obviously, everybody's concerned about usage around the world because of the recession, China in particular, but you are at levels that you should be able to hedge your diesel fuel for what you need for the winter, spring, and even into early summer, because you've had a significant, almost $1.50 drop in diesel prices on the board since the summer highs. And to take advantage of that, falling prices give you opportunities in multiple places, and this is one of them where you can hedge your diesel at a cost right now that's lower than most of 22, but certainly at a much better price than we saw at the peak.
Excellent. Well, Jody, I want to thank you for your time here, for joining us here on FieldLink as we get ready for the 2023 growing season. You have a great new year, and thanks again for joining us on FieldLink.
Thank you, Bill, and happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to everybody listening.
Thanks for joining us today here on FieldLink, and we wish all of you a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and hopefully you get to enjoy your Pennsylvania cut Christmas tree this year.